Hallo, ich bin John. I'm supposed to say that. Ich bin Flow TV. Nicht. Ich spreche kein Deutsch. Ich verstehe nur ein bisschen. Okay, that's a different screen. Voila. Oh, ein Moment. There you go. So, extra points if you figure out what's in my glasses. It's something special there. Now, I normally don't put a slide like this up because I think it's a little immodest. But then it's maybe a little immodest to think you know who I am. I feel like I've had multiple careers. I started as an aerospace engineer, did crazy stuff with cruise missile engine testing. Anybody ever watched the movie Top Gun? So I did a lot of work with actually putting pilots through flat spins and actual centrifuge with actual it's called eyeballs out, because the G-forces aren't this way, they're that way. So all kinds of crazy things that morphed my career from engineering and working with hardware to doing software. So I think it's been a blessing having that engineering mindset and that systems thinking, as you'll see. And I still code today. So I work at Adaptivist, do consulting. Adaptivist is really fun, but they're mostly known for Atlassian stuff, which is kind of weird, but a friend of a friend asked me to talk to the CEO, so I ended up coming there. And we're doing crazy stuff, a couple of us, with how to not only reimagine Agile, but how to elevate our game, because I think you'll hear at least my opinion on what I think we need to do. But yeah, I still write code. I still do BDD. So I want to go over sort of three things. This will be a bit of a tasting menu. I'm going to put on, did I do this right? Q&A me. Because that's more fun. This I'm going to force on you, so to speak, but Q&A is more like a pull request. You get to, and that's way more fun because I like randomness. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of what I think of first principles, how I work. That might help explain a little bit about what I think agility is. And then what we might do in the future, how we might, and it's only a might, Rolf, who knows, right? It might just tank, but we might also be able to figure something out to help rescue the world, shall I say. So there's a lot of youngsters here who maybe only ever knew Agile, which is kind of crazy. It started dawning on me a couple years ago. Like, oof. Yeah, you don't even know what we were doing 25 plus years ago. So having done Defense Department stuff, you can imagine I was surrounded by large, heavyweight process. So things like, can you create a proposal for a year-long research and development effort with plus or minus 5% accuracy? Yeah, no. But we just learn to pretend, learn to do things. Also, you may have heard of rational unified process, but hopefully not. But if you did, it was awesome. Imagine a place you could go that had diagrams, and you click on the elements of the diagrams, and you dig into other stuff. And there's roles, and it looks like all kinds of gears, all kinds of really well laid out processes, and all amazing stuff. And then there was a military standard spec. Well, a lot of times people celebrated the process. So I don't know if that's familiar at all to you, but that's what we were facing back when 17 of us gathered to try to be the little guys, the little tiny, no marketing budget, different processes. So there were about 6 different processes represented. So can we do better? Turns out, yeah, we created Agile. And You might know people that are still experiencing this. Does anybody experience this today? Or know people that experience this today? It's like the same stupid bullets that I'm like, wait. Oh, the only thing I changed on this slide was big upfront planning done frequently. Like at least back in the day in waterfall, you only, I kind of did it up, the stuff up front, because why assume things might change? So I find this to be relatively appalling. Maybe that's a little harsh. I'll exaggerate for effect. People call these big heavyweight things agile today. Like, what the heck? I guess maybe they think there's so much time has passed, no one remembers the past. And just erase the history and pretend like, okay, now it's a web for that giant process-looking thing that you can click on stuff and drill down. It used to be a CD. But I think it's the same kind of thing. So I'm hoping maybe we can combat that by raising awareness. Like, what does it mean to be agile? If you think we left Snowbird, which is up in the, not too high, but up in the Utah Wasatch Range, knowing that this would be big, no, we had no idea. We almost, I'll just say barely published it. Hey, what do you think? Should we put this? Remember, this is 2001. Well, you can't remember if you were really young. So this was 2000. That's like Jim Highsmith once Reimagining Agile. Back to the basics. And I said, well, if you've never been there, you can't go back. But some of you may have been there. Some of you may be able to understand that back in 2001, the web was really, almost kind of dopey. So we almost didn't publish it. It was just kind of all right, go ahead, throw it on a website. Why not? So in the moment, the other thing that I really love about that event is most of us can't recollect everything the same way, which is great. That, I think, is a beautiful testament to we were just there drinking beer, working hard and writing stuff and skiing. Did I mention skiing? Yeah, it's great skiing there. So 17 of us, 6 processes, kind of wanted to figure out what was the gist. Imagine a bunch of object-oriented people getting together. What do we do with a bunch of examples? Why? We model it and we create abstractions. So that's kind of what I think we were doing there, creating abstractions. And what did we end up with? Kind of what we know and love today as the 4 values and the 12 principles. But as I look back at this, and I've added some little comments, but I think it's really amazing to look at the top, the preamble, and realize the humility that's there. It's not, okay, peons, we figured it out. Here's the 10 tablets. No, it's we are uncovering. And I still, to this day, feel that way. This is one of the hardest things to do, is to try to be agile, because it takes constant attention and constant, shall I say, challenging of yourself. The left over the right is another illustration of humility. We didn't say do it. We even argued about the duration. Well, should it be 3 weeks? Should it be 2 weeks? Should it be a month? Who cares? The point of having some ambiguity is a blessing and a curse. So this over that. It's not instead of. I think some people inserted instead of, and then they didn't do something. Okay, now, that's not it either. So a good friend of mine challenged me, must have been last year-ish, something that drove me to get Jim Highsmith and a couple other people at a round table to discuss this. He challenged me and said, what's anybody fresh out of school supposed to do with this? I'm like, nothing. Read it? I don't know. Yeah, that's a great point. There's nothing actionable. It's not a process. It's not step 1, step 2, step 7. So what are people supposed to do with this? I have some ideas, but those that understand it don't need it. And what's funny was early on after this I remember I would do keynotes at Java 1 and stuff like that, and I would see, there was one gentleman who had memorized the 4 values. And later on after his talk, he came up, he saw me in the back of the room, and he said that he was mildly nervous trying to recite them from memory. I'm like, dude, I don't think I could. Because if you live it, you don't necessarily need to recite it. And that's the level we want to get to. And even, I won't go over the principles, but even the first bullet is probably the greatest one. I would say the first value, individuals and interactions over process and tools, is super important. And this first bullet, which is do valuable things that make your clients smile. And usually there's an exchange of something that allows us to eat. Bartering's great. But the key to the 2 points that I made about the values is being humble is a super awesome thing to do, even when you know you're right. That's a joke. You're supposed to laugh a little bit. But if you treat things more like a hypothesis than as if you actually know it, you'll be better off. That's the big flaw in our world of what you might call knowledge work. If you're saying we're doing knowledge work, that means we're not doing like making bricks. Not to say there's anything wrong with making bricks. But it's not like we're making 100 or thousands of the same thing. We're not even making cars. We're making typically novel things. And to pretend like we know exactly what something we've never done is to some plus or minus 5% level of accuracy is a fool's errand, if that translates. So being humble is, I think, necessary in this world. You may have heard people, process, and tools. I've been saying it for decades, long before the manifesto. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you think about what happened when a bunch of us gathered with our different disciplines, those different types of ways of working, this is a fun play on the word work, and I don't know how well it translates into Werk and the various different connotations, but a team of people with an actual shared intention or vision or goal working together will figure out a way of working that works. And you might write it down. Maybe that's why we have language, to write down and share with either others that weren't there at the time. But that's really what you should expect all teams to do. You didn't need to have the Agile Manifesto to be successful, right? Scrum is not necessary to actually deliver product. You can do it sight unseen. If you never read anything, if you just actually learn how to work together. So I say that because I think we've lost our way, and we mistake following somebody else's process to the letter as if they know your context. And it might be right, but it might not. And so it's really important for me anyway, people, process, and tools, but somehow we've gotten the people shoved down. Maybe they're all the way to the bottom. I mean, I've used Jira since it was created. And before that, I used some other simple tool. And when I came to Adaptivist, I realized, oof, I'm like a kindergartner amongst PhD people about Jira. Like, ay. I didn't know it could do all that, because to me, it's simple. It's slightly better than sticky notes on a wall in that it's accessible from around the world at any time. You don't have to be in the same room. But somehow we shoved people down. And that is, I think, my hypothesis is that's the root cause of why we're in the state we're in. A lot of overemphasis on process. And I would often say I'm a process nut. And what my colleague Jon Turley at Adaptivist, he corrected me once. He said, "Now you're actually a value nut." I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, how do we get to the value better? And it isn't just through process and tools. And I think getting back to first principles, how I practice is, as I said, I think maybe I was fortunate to have stumbled into software from an engineering perspective, Because as an aerospace engineer, everything fights everything in terms of you want to fly farther, you want to fly faster, you want to carry more bombs, whatever, or more people, I should say. They all compete. You can't just have an excess of one without it impacting the rest of the system. And same with what we do for a living with most of our software development products. It requires, I think, a more holistic, a higher level systems thinking and not compartmentalize. Our goal is often to break things down into chunks and then kind of stop and think we've got it. And turn things into units. And we even put roles around it and whole departments around it. And in my opinion, you need to, it's okay to do some of those things, but you need to hold on to the higher level, the higher view. Because I think of Agile as more of the state of mind, more about our way of thinking, our way of making meaning. We'll talk a little bit more about that. No one's asking for Agile, right? They're asking for value. They're asking for something else. Agile is a means. It's not, hey, can you deliver some PIs, program increments, for those who have not yet been exposed? So I sort of add a fourth thing to the people, process, and tools that I think also gets lost. There was a lot that was implicit in Snowbird. A bunch of us who practiced, okay, this is modest, but I'm going to say, had our act together, were technically competent, and that was a given. We just didn't write it down. A lot of things we didn't write down. But for me, this is super important, and this is an attempt that I did. This might be going on 20 years. Attempt I did. Well, can you write down how you do it? Well, you see, I kind of do this stuff and I revisit it. And it's really hard to have this sort of swirling attitude of I don't do everything necessary for, let's just say, the idea up front. I do just enough. And you'll see this as a repeating thing. So it's kind of wandering through, doing enough of the requirements, but not too much. And it's a strange thing to talk about. But I'm often looking for risks. Maybe that's that engineering angle. What's the most important thing? So you kind of wander through this, and you see, I'm even surprised I might have a few changes. Like, okay, parallel development's cool, but the cooler kids do, like trunk-based. But another thing I realized, and this is some learning goes, a day without learning sucks. So I've been working with my colleague, Jon Turley. He and I have been working with Michael Hammond, and he's got an older book, Evolve Agility. It's pretty deep from a perspective of it's more about the ways people make meaning. It's more about your what we call vertical development, your kind of the fact that we can grow in our capacity. And I think it's super important because it's one of those hard things to say that if you don't know what you don't know, it's one of those where this helps build some, while we might do a lot of practice and build our skills, that's called horizontal learning. The vertical learning is more up here. It's more about being able to have more perspectives, greater capacity to see more things, be able to hold different elements that are going on. And I realized after reading some bits in the book, like, ooh, without knowing it, I intuitively, my way of working created what Michael calls a deliberately developmental, basically container. By having, and you'll see, by having things like a vision, by having ways that we think about things, the processes. You could even say Scrum with its processes is a set of social practices. So unbeknownst to me, there's actual methods behind this that can help us. And I just sort of recently stumbled on it. And this is my, as I would say, handful of what I think are critical to build software, and probably anything. The vision, the flag in the distance, the general direction of travel, what it is we're doing, why are we here? You'd be shocked if you ask some of the folks you work with what the business purpose is of what we're building. Hopefully people know it, but in consulting with many companies, we often find not everybody, it's just a job. Okay, all right. Oh, that sucks. The just enough requirements. That's an actual board from a major paint manufacturer. And you can see they would come in with an epic, so we were actually in the factory. We weren't in the downtown pretty offices. We went to a factory where the PhDs, and by the way, they don't sell paint. They sell color. It's like, ooh. That's kind of mind-blowing. Paint is a commodity. Being able to get the color you want is a skill. It's crazy. But they would come in with a new idea, we stick at the bottom, right? So that's like a roadmap-y thing. And the cards would move up as time went on, or maybe they would shove something in the middle and shove things down. Very analog. And you can see the little bits of sticky notes next to it. So something that freshly came might only have a couple of ideas. Just kind of getting it. So that's what I mean about the journey. It's okay to revisit things. Matter of fact, you should. Because I don't want to spend a lot of detail and do the same amount of work all the time on every issue, because that might be wasteful. We may never do it. So just do the bare minimum. And then as it went up the stack, you can see the one at the very top has all kinds of stuff, because it kept wandering in. And over maybe a matter of weeks, it began to fill out. And then what you don't see is on the board next, there's even some UX sketches on the right that are hanging off there, I noticed. So, we're ready to do this. We did some UX. And it's about to get popped off the stack, the roadmap stack, onto the Kanban board for development, where, again, we actually stack ranked the issues, picked one up, and then met again to get the full details right in time, and then went to like a tester, the subject matter expert, and the dev all talked. So that's a level of just enough, and it changes as you get closer to implementing. And then just enough domain modeling. That was a big thing in my world back in the day. It still is for me, but it seems like, does anybody do domain models anymore? Is that a thing? Let me cry a little bit, but that's okay. It's just me. The point is that forms the language at which we talk about our world. Not some weird software language, but the language of the domain, the language of the business. And that's key, because I don't want to invent dopey software terms. So domain modeling helps give us shared vocabulary. And then just enough architecture. Maybe you're doing something very similar. Lots of web apps run the same way, model view controller, or it might just be another Rails app. Or this is a little picture of something crazy. I think I remember lots of messaging with hospitals and like ambulance EMS systems. So it might be a crazy architecture, but whatever it is, there needs to be some architecture. And then I talked about consistency, where you need to have a very consistent user interface. My firefighter app is stupidly consistent, and I get NPS ratings of 9s and 10s all the time. Every once in a while, like a 1. But usually that was a firefighter, like just trying to close the screen. Like, oh, and I always ask people, was this real or was this But the consistency, I think, gives me really high NPS because it's super easy to use. And the consistent architecture is, we don't make money on the boilerplate architecture. Back in the day, there was also model-driven architecture. You might have, if you ever play with Rails, it's got a scaffolding code generator where you can stand up a simple app just to test stuff like that, because it should be that simple. In 1995 through 98, when I was creating the manufacturing execution system that built IBM's computers, which was a big feather in our cap for sure, it was a lot like Rails, super consistent, because you only make money when you're building the code to generate the valuable feature. All the boilerplate to get data in and out, let's say, up to the user and persisted, that should be as boring and as consistent as possible. I can grep super powerfully if things are consistent. Even if I'd rather have consistently mediocre than, wow, this part's really awesome. Who wrote that? Or another team that I was working with is like, wow, it looks like you had 3 people develop these different apps. Oh yeah, how'd you know? Because it's obvious. The same looking menu structure is built differently. Anyway, consistency is super powerful. And then always be shipping. That's what we do now. Back then it was harder, but even in 95, one of the first things we did as doing just enough domain modeling, just enough requirements gathering, testing out, it needed to be a thin client application, so testing out the architecture. Early on, we had a build system that basically pressed a button and automatically deployed. That was in 95. You had to do it all by hand. Now, if you're not doing that, there's no excuse. I mean, today, stuff's so easy. There's no excuse not to have automated tests, not to have easy deployments. So that's my approach. And there's a lot more to it. But that's a big chunk of the underlying foundation. And just enough, speaking of not being actionable, what does that mean? Guess what? You got to use your brain. I don't know what it means. I know what it means for me. I know what it means in the right context. I know that I'm looking through the eyes of risk, probably. So can I wait to learn more about that detail? Yes or no? Or if I don't learn about that detail now, is it going to bite me in the ass? Yes or no? So that's why I think Agile is hard, because you need to constantly challenge. Don't just keep doing the same thing all the time, but rather figure out what's the smallest thing I can get away with. So maybe don't tell your boss, or maybe tell your boss. But I like to be lazy. And I say that facetiously. It's what I think can also happen is people in roles with almost excess team sizes will, oh gosh, I got to pretend like I'm busy all day, so I'm just going to do excess amounts of specifications or UX. I mean, I saw something crazy in a very big company that everyone would know their name, cosmetic manufacturer. And I want to say the feature request was something like, imagine there was an account profile. This wasn't it, but this is a simple enough example. Can we add middle name or maybe middle initial? Let's pretend that was the issue. Well, it had a UX drawing to it. Like, you kidding me? Like, you think the developer couldn't figure out how to add a new field to an existing form on an existing... Stuff like that is a sign of excess, a sign of not using your brain, just basically filling in, I don't know, I guess your timesheet. So you need to be lazier than that. And I think far too much work is done far too much in advance to far too great of detail. So that's another thing. Ask, can I do less? Because you can always add more, but you can never take back away the time you spent doing too much, and you might even not know that you did too much. So this is another super hard but super simple concept. Hard to practice because you fight yourself. We all want to excel. We all want to do a good job. But I want to do the least amount possible to get to the same end goal faster. So that's a huge, I like to say, sneak up on the answer. So this all boils down to, in essence, learning how to think differently about what we do. Embrace it more internally. To be able to be agile and not just do some steps, not just do some rote practice that someone else figured out, but rather challenge yourselves. And it starts with you, or starts with me. And that's another thing that I've seen where we're brought in by management, and the management is saying they need to get more agile. Like, dude, or dudette, you need to get more agile too. So it's something that we all have to strive to work. And one of the things that I like to use like to tell my mom, what does agile mean? Well, it's really about shortening the time between doing something and getting a reaction. And tell me it isn't, if you think about it. TDD, test-driven development, super fast. Right? I'm getting really, microseconds or seconds. Bob Martin gets microseconds, I get seconds. I'm not as good. Building a bit of a feature and showing it to the user. But certainly building the whole product and putting it out there to see if anybody wants it, that's a really long, expensive gap. So most of what we do, even being lazy, is trying to reduce the gap in time. Because the longer you spend doing something that may be having diminishing value, the longer it takes to get feedback. And another good trick, if you think you're doing, you can imagine a lot of this gets honed from doing Defense Department work where there's large, dumb documents. So a fun thing was, I wonder what the smallest amount I can get away with is. I wonder if anybody reads this and just puts something in there and see if anything triggers. And now with something like ChatGPT, you can just BS your way through something. And like if you don't think there's much value in doing it, just spend as little time on it as possible. So, does that make sense? Reimagining Agile. That was something I mentioned earlier, triggered by a friend's challenge. Yeah, what the hell is someone supposed to do with 4 values coming out of college or something like that? Yeah, I don't know. And it's also a culmination of there's a lot of Agile bashing out there, like on LinkedIn and stuff like that. And every time I go to see it, I'm like, all these bullets that you list, none of that's Agile. That's just a bunch of crap that you shouldn't be doing, and you're calling it Agile. All right, well, why is that? So I think there's an opportunity to maybe help bring back some of the, let's say, good qualities, raise them higher up. My hypothesis is anybody working in a place or knows of a place where Agile is flourishing and kicking ass and doing well? Awesome, see me later. I'll take names. Yeah, because it can happen. It doesn't all have to be like process jail. It doesn't have to be insanity. It doesn't have to suck to go to work. It shouldn't. So I want to make those more visible, and I want to essentially take an opportunity. I'll jump forward to, there's a reimaginingagile.com that we're standing up. I want it to be a collaborative web app. Right now, there's no users yet. But the idea is a place where we can help provide, ammunition might be a strong word, but ways to help combat fake Agile. To provide people a sense of, here's what good Agile looks like, here's ways to fight back, here's a different domains. Now, I've mostly been in software, but Agile works in lots of other domains. It can be extended. And the launch group for this was, as I mentioned, Adaptivist paid for Jim Highsmith. We went to the Agile Alliance last year in Florida. James Grennan came, a few other people, Tim Ottinger, some other folks. We got together to kind of have a roundtable. It was supposed to be just a bunch of us getting together, drinking beers, and then my marketing department found out about it, and then it was like, okay, now it's like out of the bag. And it turned into something that had cameras and videos and actual, someone who could really help guide the discussion. It was pretty cool. But that started this whole thing with Jim and I kind of recognizing simultaneously that something needs to be done. And I feel like I checked out of the Agile community, I don't know when, but about the time when people were mistaking that it's just about a couple of day courses and everything is good. And I'm like, all right, knock yourselves out. I'm just going to go do some fun Agile stuff with real product development teams. So I checked out, but I've been back in it for a while, and I feel like this is one more shot at giving an injection of uplifting to the Agile principles that I think are so necessary to work on it. And I'll explain a little bit about what I mean by exemplars. And I'll just use this as the exemplar. So this is a little bit of a map of what I think the Reimagining Agile web app is going to look like. So exemplars are places where agility is flourishing. And how do we know agility is flourishing? Well, you're probably living the values. You're probably living most of the principles. That's kind of what I mean. And it feels like it, right? You can tell. It feels awesome. It's not drudgery. It's not people slapping your wrist if you do something wrong process-wise. So the exemplars I want to use as beacons of hope and they're not just marketing case studies, but places to say, look, here's an awesome thing that's happening. We actually have one of our customers who weathered a crazy, let's just say, a government agency shut down one of their primary ways of living and making money, which then affected all their clients. So can you imagine, whatever it is you're doing for a living, suddenly someone pulls the plug? Well, that's not exactly awesome product building. It's like, oh crap, how can we react? So it's a really cool story about how a team was able to react and adapt, and they were truly agile about it. So exemplars are to build those shining lights. But more than that, a few of us are going to set up we're using methods of inquiry to try to dig. So just like the 17 of us got together in Snowbird and figured out what was going on amongst the different methods, I want to move a level above that, like it's another meta layer up. For these exemplars, what was going on? And maybe try to dig and find nuggets of gold, possibly things that you might not even know are going on, but through some inquiry, be able to expose that, be able to provide moves. And we're calling them moves because I don't want it to be yet some other process, but rather a bunch of small little moves you can put together in your context that matches, like a set of patterns. And if you're used to object-oriented patterns, they apply in a given context typically, and then you try them. Or like chess. Chess has moves. Given the board is set up, you can use a move. So it's two purposes. One is to give hope, and the other one is a little researchy, and to find out what is going on. How come your company is able to do awesome stuff and mine isn't? What is that? What are you doing differently? Can we try that here? And then people can do what I'm calling initiatives, make experiments, try things on your own, give feedback, and hopefully globally around the world as it spreads. But that's the idea about, can we find that next level to help those of us who struggle with our environment, with our system of working that's not as agile as it could be? Are there ways for us to get better? So that's my goal for the Reimagining Agile. So for those of you who do have some awesome stories to tell, I actually really mean, hit me up on LinkedIn, send an email, whatever. We'll get some time together to talk, because I think there's a lot more out there than we might imagine, and we need some positive press and some positive ways of thinking beyond what I would say some of the agile bashing. Because for me, another thing dawned on me when talking with the Polish agile community. They had some questions about the language. And there was even, I forget exactly which bit, but there was part of maybe one of the principles. They said, we can't even say that. Our language doesn't work like that, which is interesting. I never thought about that. Like, yeah, that could lead to some confusion. So for me, making Agile accessible to everybody is my next goal. Danke. Vielen Dank. Thank you. So there will be a Q&A. Thank you.